The purpose of this video is to demonstrate an important CSS and HTML concept called the display property. The display property controls literally how browsers display elements, and it's a fundamental characteristic of every element in HTML. In order to demonstrate the display property, I've got a very simple text file here, a simple HTML file here. It's got an H1, it's got a list-based navigation menu, it's got an H2, some paragraphs. Inside the paragraphs are a few bolded elements as well as a few italicized elements. So if I look at it on the page, here we have a very simple HTML page. If I look at the CSS, what I've basically done here is given background colors to the different heading levels of a light blue, a light yellow for paragraphs, and a sort of darker grayish for the blue, for the bold and the italicized tags. Looking in the browser then, what we see is that anything that is a block display property, such as this heading, or that heading, a block element will take the full width of its container. In this case, it's taking the full width of the body of the document. And we see it's taking the full width by the fact that the background color goes all the way to the right. A paragraph will take the full width of the container, and we see that with the yellow going all the way to the edge. Another important consideration of a block element is that a block element will start on its own line and will force the subsequent content to start on its own line. So those are blocks. A element that's fundamentally different than a block is an inline element. Inline elements do not take the full width of the container. So we see an inline element here like the bold tags that I have used, as well the italicized tags that I used. The background colors here don't go all the way to the left or right of the parent element. Instead, these backgrounds only go as far as the text that the tag is wrapped around. So here I have an I tag wrapped around this phrase and a B tag wrapped around that phrase. What's more, an inline element does not force the next element, the next content in the page, to go below it, but rather go beside it. So a way to remember it, inline elements really behave like text. Block elements behave like blocks. So common block elements are going to be paragraphs, your headings, etc. I'm going to go to my editor here for a second. I'm going to go and make a style for nav.ul. I'm going to give that a background color. And this one I'll make a background color of pink. And then I'll make a style for nav.li. I'm going to give it a border. And I'm going to make a style for nav.a. So I'm doing nav.a and nav.ul, nav.li, so that these styles would apply only within a navigation element. So this A here, I'm going to give a background color of, I don't know, blue. How unimaginative. And a color of white. Okay, let's go look at the document. What we see here is that a UL is a block element. You see that it's taking the full width of the container. LIs are also block elements. They look like they're taking the full width or almost, and basically they are, but a UL is a special case because of the dots. So I'm going to remove the dots. from my UL. And I can do that by using list style or list style type none. Dots are now removed, and what is happening on a UL is that it's got a little bit of additional padding, and some older browsers used margin. But if we reduce those, set them to 0, we now see that an LI behaves exactly like any other block element. We also learn that an A tag is an inline element because it is only as wide as the text that it is wrapped around. If I put a hover background color here, so background color, I'll just make it black. The hover is as the background color change doesn't fill up the LI. What's more, when I mouse over here, I don't get any hover effect. So the link, in other words, is only as large as the text that it is enclosing. So the A tag is definitely inline. But what we can do is use the block property to change the characteristics. So as an example, if I went here, display none, what I'm going to actually, oh, whoops, I'm doing it on the UL. I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to do it on the A. If I go display none, what happens here is I'm literally hiding the links. So my list is collapsing. All we're seeing is the borders because there's no content in it. However, there's no content in it because the A's have disappeared. We've told the browser don't display them. But now, let's just comment that out for a second. This will take it back to its default incarnation as an inline element. Now let's change the display property to display block. So I'm saving it, I'm going to the browser. Before I reload the browser, here we see the inline quality. When I reload the browser, now we see that the blue of the link is going all the way across. It is filling up its parent LI. So if I mouse there, what we're seeing, not just mousing over the text, but mousing over the entire space of the parent LI gives us this nice button-like menu structure. So by changing this particular element, the A's inside navs, to be block elements, we're making more functional menus. And this is a very, very common technique with menus. Now, let's go a little further though. I'm going to put a bit of padding just to make the box a little bit bigger. So 5 rem, which if you haven't used rems before, this will equal by default 8 pixels, although that can change. Now we've made our box bigger. So the A is bigger, and as a result, the LIs are bigger. Okay. Now let's try something. So we've known about block elements and inline elements, but I want to add one more thing. And to explain what I'm going to add here, I want to look at the HTML. You'll notice that all of my inline elements have actually appeared inside block elements. A block element cannot appear inside an inline element. And this kind of makes sense because an inline element will flow left to right like text as long as we're in a left to right language. A block is fundamentally different. It flows top to bottom. So the browser is going to get really confused if we put, with one or two exceptions, block elements inside inline elements. It's just not supposed to happen. And you won't get reliable results. However, If I want my LI elements now to flow from left to right instead of from top to bottom, we can utilize a very, very useful property called inline block. So I'm going to go to the LI. I'm going to say here, display inline block. If you're using Visual Studio Code and its wonderful Emmet-based keyboard shortcuts, DIB for display inline block, DB for block, etc. Save that, reload. Now what we're seeing, the pink background of the UL, because the UL is a block, that is going the full width of the container. But the LIs now, being inline block, are behaving with characteristics of blocks as well as characteristics of inline. Right now, the inline characteristic is the fact that they are flowing from left to right. They are behaving like text. And if I go to the nav UL and say text align center, this is going to center any inline element below it, not just text, because an inline element behaves like text. If we go look at what happens, we now see that the text itself centers inside the LI, but more importantly, because these LIs are inline, they too are centering. I'm just going to comment out the pink background of the nav UL here. Reload there. Very, very common way of making menus. So the inline block here is leveraging block and inline elements. Specifically, it's behaving like an inline element because it's moving left to right like text, but it is also able to contain inline or block elements inside it, which an inline element can't do. So inline block being applied to the LIs here gives us a very, very quick, useful way of lining our content up and fundamentally changing how this list-based menu appears. In fact, most people who looked at this element would not assume that it is a list, but it makes sense to mark up a menu as a list because a menu is a list of options.